And welcome to the SWAN Technology Update. And right before your eyes, if you were watching the presentation slideshow, I changed the name from SWAN Technology Users Group to the SWAN Technology Update. We will continue to do these presentations in the spirit of SWAN Technology Users Group, but we want to make these more of a technology update. So we'll be presenting just different things that are going on with SWAN, specifically in the IT and system support department, different projects that we're working on, how they're impacting your libraries. And of course, you always have the opportunity to chime in if there's anything that you want to ask questions about or give feedback on, or we also will still continue to do the open forum later on. But we're going to change the name. We're going to change the format a little bit. So it is the SWAN Technology Update. And I do want to encourage all library staff, directors, cert managers, anyone that wants to attend, everyone is welcome. Certainly this is going to be more technology oriented, but anyone is welcome to come in and check out these updates. So that said, again, welcome to the SWAN Technology Update for September 23rd. I'm Stephen Schluett, the IT and Systems Support Manager for SWAN, and joining me today will be a presentation by Rudy Host, SWAN's Systems Engineer. So let's take a look at the agenda. So we'll go through our normal uptime report. I'll give you a breakdown of the last 6 months. We'll do some project updates, and those will be updates relating specifically to the IT team, the IT department, and we'll just kind of everything generally more IT oriented that's happening within SWAN. We'll go over the securities initiative that we talked about the quarterly. I do want to recap some of those things for anyone that may have missed it, and I think this is a good opportunity for us to emphasize some of the key points that we went over. We'll do our new feature, how do we do that? And that's when Rudy's actually going to take over. He's going to give us a quick presentation on open sourcing a project. We're going to talk about ProPay card swipes, and then we'll open it up to open forum. So with that said, let's jump right into the system uptime report. So first of all, looking at the Workflow Symphony server. So this is our core ILS server. This handles all the interactions. This is the patron database. And really for the last 6 months, we have had no outages that were unplanned. So that's been fantastic. And I mention it every time that we have one of these meetings, but really our reliability has increased significantly since we went over to Microsoft Azure. And it's the fact that it's cloud-based, so we're less prone to network interruptions and kind of the general system day-to-day, we don't have hard drive failures and things like that because it's all in this Microsoft Azure data center that's all controlled by them. So the reliability has been phenomenal, and everything to this point for our Symphony server, which is self-hosted, that's all been planned outages. And for the most part, they've been planned patching that exceed kind of our 5-minute our 5 minutes of downtime time limit. That's off hours. So those are the ones that we acknowledge here. Or for that matter, if we do any major systems upgrades, so like our migration to Symphony 3.7.1, we always note those here and how long those took as well. Looking at our OPAC services, so 2 of 3 of these are hosted by SWAN, and that's the Aspen Catalog and Web Services, which actually lives on our Symphony server. The Enterprise Catalog is hosted by Circe Dynix SaaS, but I think it's useful for us to see everything, all of our OPAC services tied into one cluster here. So we've got Aspen Discovery, Web Services, and Enterprise all noted here. Enterprise, we're on a version that's been really stable, so we haven't really seen any downtime for Enterprise, aside from we had to restart the services for an SSL certificate update. And then remember that Aspen Discovery is still kind of, it is a live server, but we are making tweaks and adjustments to it every single day. So there's a little bit more downtime relating to that, but even the Aspen Discovery server has been pretty solid. And we've been avoiding doing any sort of major changes during the day, during live hours. And then also our web services, which, just as a reminder, web services is that intermediary that talks between the OPAC service between Enterprise and Aspen to the Symphony ILS server. So web services talks in between those two and ensures that all the data is is syncing. So when web services is down, it does impact both Aspen and Enterprise. We're also tracking other notable outages now, and we've been doing that for the last few quarters. And really, in the last 6 months, the only other notable outage that we've had is the support site and ticketing system was down for a planned outage. And that was actually when we migrated the SWAN support site and the ticketing system from our Rails data center to now we have those hosted in Azure. So we've actually moved everything out of the Rails data center now. We're completely independent from Rails data center. Everything is either in Azure or we have a couple of select servers at Quail Ridge. But we're pretty excited to be, I want to say, 97% Microsoft Azure at this point. So let's look and see how all of that sums up. So I just kind of, we usually do that pie graph, which doesn't really tell you much because it's just kind of a sliver to show you the downtime. But I thought this was a little bit more helpful to just see how the trends have changed over the last few quarters. So we're looking all the way back to the third quarter of 2020. And really the lowest point that we had was a 98%. And that was in the first quarter, and it, you know, it really pains me because we could have had a 100%. But that other service that really nicked us was the SVA server. The SVA server, which does all our notice which used to do all of our notice dialing, was actually down for I think 2 days in January or February this year. Oh, sorry. But the SVA server was down for a couple days. Oh, let me back up a little bit there. It was down for a couple of days back in January or February, and so that brought down our combined uptime to 98%. But otherwise, we've been looking pretty solid. Quarter 3 has been excellent at 99.81%, and really we're looking for that 99% mark. That's our goal for every quarter. Getting a little noise here. If you wouldn't all mind just muting your microphone unless you want to just shout out a question or anything like that. Okay. So that's all our system downtime. If anyone has any questions, feel free to shout them out in the chat, or if you want to just unmute, you're welcome to do that as well. Otherwise, we'll move on to project updates. So the first project that I want to acknowledge is our Symphony 371 upgrade, which was completed, and we actually finished that in early August, and then libraries had the month of August to finish up their workflows installations. That's basically the application that connects to the new Symphony server version. I just want to say, first of all, thank you everyone for getting your Symphony server or your workflows installations upgraded in all of the library workstations. That's really important to all of these upgrade processes, is making sure that the clients are all updated as well. We get a lot of questions of why do we use a custom installer? A lot of you have probably seen, it prompts you and it says, hey, do you want to just automatically update? Do you want to just grab the update from the server? What you do when you click OK on that is you basically pull in a completely bare bones version of workflows. That's the unbranded version. That's from Circe Dynamics, and it doesn't have a lot of the tweaks that we need for SWAN libraries. So we actually build our custom installer. That's the MSI that you download from the support site. And I just really want to briefly touch on why we do that. The first and really one of the most important ones is to reduce the server overhead from client installations. So we have up to maybe 3,000 or a little bit more library staff members that connect up to our server, almost on a daily basis. Probably right now we have 1,000 users that are all connected. Figure that's probably the morning shift, and then they'll change into different shifts, as the day goes. And but we can have up to 3,000 users that potentially will connect up to the server. So that's the possibility of up to 3,000 connections to request that update and pull it from our server. So that creates a lot of overhead. not only from a bandwidth perspective, but also from a CPU perspective. And because that server's doing lots of things, we want to avoid having all that communication going to the server. So instead, we build our own custom installer, which permits us to do other things that tie into that installer. So the first one is we remove and clean up previous installations of workflows. So your 362 version, the MSI that we build will actually uninstall the 362 version and then install the 371 version. But it also retains all of your customizations. So the things that you put into your user profile, if you change the colors, if you change the font size and things like that, for the most part, there are some tweaks that don't always translate over. But that's what this does, is it cleans up the old installations and retains your profiles. We also bundle in additional drivers that support your signature pads for those libraries that are using signature pads. These drivers were custom made for SWAN when we went live back in 2015. And so that's why we have to keep adding them to the Symfony installation, because they actually, they don't bundle them in for all of the other libraries. This is something that's specific to SWAN. We also customize all the logos and the icons. So when you actually see, workflows, you see the SWAN logo. So it's kind of, it triggers to say, oh, that's SWAN. I'm going to go ahead and open that from the desktop. So that we found that pretty helpful. We also pre-populate some of the server settings. So specifically when you're signing into the server, we pre-populate that with the production host name. That doesn't always work, but we do try to make that so it's easier for library staff to just get going and not having to look up all that information. And then we didn't do it with the most recent version, but in older versions and future versions, we also substitute the JRE with a newer version. Cersei Dynix doesn't always package in the latest JRE, and we're not sure why they do that, but we're continuing to press them on the issue. But we do like to substitute in a newer version that's more stable and more secure. So that is why we run Symfony 371 through our own custom MSI installer. Now, another thing that's come up a few times with the new Workflows version is that you may have noticed with this version, we ended Windows 7 support. And so that the application no longer supports Windows 7, it's Windows 8 and up. And you might be asking, well, why does the application not support that anymore? And it's because Microsoft, on the whole, actually ended support. Windows 7 went end of support in January 2020. So over a year ago, Microsoft ended support entirely. And what that means is that you basically no longer get any sort of patching. There are no security updates or system updates or anything like that that'll go to Windows 7 machines. That makes your library far more susceptible to ransomware, to viruses, to even just kind of standard intrusions, because there could be potentially unpatched holes in Windows 7. So I would really stress, I think everyone submitted their completion forms. We were at 100%. So I think all the libraries have basically installed on their Windows 10 machines. But if you do have a few of those Windows 7 machines lingering out there, even if they're lab workstations or even if they're, OPAC stations, get them upgraded to Windows 10, even potentially Windows 11. It just poses a security risk for your library. You don't want to continue to run that. And also, when we were doing some reading on the Windows 7 end of support, we found that Microsoft, in many cases, is still offering a free upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10, especially if you have some kind of agreement already with Microsoft or with a third-party vendor that's providing your licensing. You might be able to get Windows 10 free of charge, and the upgrade process is not terribly difficult anymore. I would highly recommend going and taking care of that. So moving forward, SWAN supports Windows 8, Windows 10, and we do in some cases support the latest Mac OS. If you need a Workflows installation, we do tend to have Workflows installations for it. They don't always work as reliably, but that is there if you need it. So just let us know. And then I also want to mention that we have Windows 11 support coming soon. That has not been acknowledged by Cersei Dynix in the release notes just yet, but we know that they're working on it. We're also going to be working on it. We're going to install Windows 11, but I'll say from our experience, we ran Windows 10 for months before it was acknowledged for workflows or anything like that, and there were no problems. So usually it's the newer versions, you won't have any issues. It's the older versions that really tend to be an issue. Now I can't quite recall if we have Windows 11 support bundled into our MSI. If that becomes a problem, if you do install Windows 11 and you are getting unsupported messages, please just send us a ticket and we can take a look right away. But we'll also be testing that and ensure that our version is compatible. Moving on to Aspen Discovery. So I won't go too far into this, but I do want to mention that Aspen Discovery has been a big focus for our UX team and also our BIB services team. They've been spending a lot of time very diligently working to perfect Aspen Discovery, and really that's probably what we would expect from our OPAC workstations moving forward, something that's going to replace Enterprise. So I wanted to make just a mention of Aspen Discovery to ensure that basically if you are you're either going to be on cohort 1 or cohort 2. If you're an IT staff member and you're thinking, I don't know what cohort we're at. Hi. Was there a question? Anyway, so sorry. So if you're either going to be in cohort 1, which is going live in October, that's our fall cohort, or cohort 2, which is going live around spring of 2022. Just make sure that you know what cohort that you're in, and if you're in an IT team and you do have to you have to facilitate that migration, just make sure that you're updating your OPACs, you're updating links to your website, you're changing any of the proxy settings on public PCs that could potentially prevent access to those different things. And there are other instructions that are included in all the training courses that Tara and the UX team have been running. So just make sure that you check in on those and watch some of the training videos as they come up. But first of all, just make sure that you check out the links, make sure you know what cohort that you're in, and that you're working with library staff in preparation for that migration. I think we had a question. Okay, so Matt Hennessy was asking, they're in cohort 2. What does he need to do to update OPAC stations? So mostly just you're probably running something like a public web browser or maybe a kiosk, and I would imagine that's resolving back to catalog.swanlibraries.net. So that's our old. The old website that you'd be using, catalog.swanlibraries.net. The new one would be your 3-letter library code. So in your case, Matthew, that would be wrs.swanlibraries.net, and that would take you right to the Aspen Discovery catalog. So you just go to all your OPAC stations, just change the default landing page, and you'd basically be off to the races. Now, some libraries are also running different proxy settings to prevent people from navigating out to, Yahoo or something like that from an OPAC station, because you want to keep them sort of more isolated to the catalog. You'll want to make sure in your proxy settings that you're permitting access to anything on the swanlibraries.net domain, or just ensuring that you are using the 3-letter code.swanlibraries.net. Any other questions that I can answer on Aspen so far? So Matthew, you won't want to do that until your cohort is going live. So if you have a go live in March, then wait until then. In the meantime, you'll want to continue to use the catalog.swanlibraries.net/WRS as you have right now. Thanks, Matthew. Good questions. Obviously, I'm not the expert in Aspen Discovery. That's really our UX team, but I did want to make sure that we acknowledge these couple of things. So the next thing I want to talk about is Sonic Wall network hardware replacements. And the first and most important thing is these Sonic Wall network hardware replacements are primarily for those libraries that a SWAN is still maintaining. So if you do not have a self-maintainer agreement, If you are running hardware that was provided by SWAN and your library staff are not managing that hardware, then this would apply to you. This is not everyone's hardware, so these are just specifically the equipment that has gone end of support anytime if it is end of support or if it's going end of support, which actually we've exceeded September. So now all of these models are end of support, and these are in a lot of our libraries. So if you look at the models like an NSA 2400 or an NSA 220, which was kind of our standard base model that a lot of libraries were running, the NSA 220. So that has gone end of support, meaning that SonicWall is no longer applying patches, no longer applying upgrades. And it's kind of the same thing as like when I was talking about Windows 7. If SonicWall is no longer supporting it, then that means it makes it more susceptible to hacking or any sort of issues like that. So make sure that you've reached out to SWAN to look into your options here. We do have 2 recommended models, or we have several recommended models that might be applicable in your situation, depending on what size current model you're running. And the prices range from about $700 to a little over $1,000, depending on what replacement that you need. And again, if you are self-maintainers, if you're running your own hardware, if you're running your own firewall, then this does not apply to you. But we do expect that you maintain your hardware, that you have hardware that can be updated, and that meets the standards of the SWAN VPN connection, which, as hardware becomes more outdated, a lot of it can't support that connection. So as long as you're supporting the connection, as long as you're still receiving patches and updates for your hardware in the library, then you should be in good shape. So this is option number 1, is that you can coordinate with SWAN and we can coordinate a replacement for your hardware. And so basically you'll send us an email ticket and you'll say, okay, I want to move forward on a replacement, and we'll figure out which piece of hardware is most appropriate for you. And then you would reach out to your third-party vendor, your distributor, and determine how to move forward, how to purchase that hardware. A lot of libraries go through CDWG, you might go through Amazon, and all of those are fine, just basically wherever you want to get the best price. Now, when you're ordering that hardware, you also want to have it shipped to SWAN's headquarters. So our 800 Quail Ridge Drive in Westmont, we do that so that we can actually configure the hardware on site at Quail Ridge, and then we can coordinate a time later on with you to visit the library and perform the upgrade. But we do need that on site at Quail Ridge first, so we can actually go through the configuration and set everything up prior to going to the library. Now, there is another option, and that is, as I mentioned before, the self-maintenance VPN agreement. So if you have a library staff that you depend on for everything network and all connectivity and all the hardware, or for that matter, if you are running your own firewall, if you're running the SWAN firewall in parallel to another firewall, it's probably going to make more sense for you to just go with our second option, which is the SWAN self-maintenance VPN agreement. So you'll go through this agreement, just sign off on that with your director, and then we can coordinate handing off credentials to your IT staff, whenever we can get that scheduled. This is our recommended approach. It seems to benefit a lot of libraries to be able to have that hands-on interaction with their firewalls and be able to maintain those on their own. Of course, SWAN does not maintain the hardware at all from that point forward, so it is all on your IT folks to handle. But this gives a lot more of that flexibility that a lot of libraries need to troubleshoot things, to add more networks, to add firewall rules, and things like that. So I see a few questions that have come in. Let me just take a quick look at those. So there was a question going back about Aspen Discovery. Andy is asking if the workflows link changes to match the library. So you do have to change the link. Yes, that's correct. So for any of your OPAC stations or any lab stations, you'll have to change the link to match the library code. And you actually have a specific library code link right now, but it's So right now it's catalog.swanlibraries.net/ your 3-letter library code. Moving forward, it's the 3-letter library code.swanlibraries.net. So we've actually made it a little bit shorter of a URL, so we're pretty happy with that. And you'll plug that into your OPAC stations and your any of your lab stations during your go live period. Matthew Hennessy is also mentioning the rack mount kits are still available via Amazon, much lower pricing compared directly through SonicWall. Yeah, that's very true. And we found that to be the case as well. If you go through Amazon, you'll find a lot of hardware that's substantially cheaper than if you go through SonicWall or Dell or even the third-party vendors. You do have to be careful on Amazon sometimes, though. You have to look at the vendor that is selling the hardware and make sure that they're reputable and they're well reviewed. You could end up getting, junk that's maybe not used, but maybe it's been sitting in a warehouse for a longer time and maybe it's been beat around or something like that. So make sure that you're going with a reputable vendor and you're buying hardware that is the right hardware and it's not knockoff or something like that.
One thing to note about that, we do provide the SonicWall model, the internal model number. If you go back, Stephen, to the recommendation slide.
Yep. Just a second.
So you have the TZ370, for instance. There's probably like 15 or 20 different SKUs for the TZ370, but that 02-SSC-2825 is the specific one that we recommend that fits in the best with our blanket contract that we have with SonicWall. So if we're supporting your SonicWall, that'll go in underneath our contract and support will be extended through the contract that we have. So these models are specifically the ones that are the hardware only and the support comes through us. So do your searching based on that, and that will more than likely get you the right piece of hardware without having to worry about sifting through the pages and pages of search results.
Yeah, thanks, Rudy. And I want to say that regardless of which option you go with, please make sure that the first thing that you do is after you've made your decision, just email SWAN. Just let us know, send in a ticket and let us know, hey, we're ready to move forward on option A or, option 1 or option 2. And we'll coordinate with you, make sure you get the right hardware, that you're sending it to the right place. If you're curious about pricing and stuff like that, we can answer some of those questions as well. But just let us know right away. We want to make sure that you don't go out there and end up buying more hardware than your library needs, or something that maybe is not quite right or more expensive than you need. So just let us know right away when you're ready to move forward. So the next project that I want to mention is the SWAN Patron Purge, and this tends to be less of an IT project, but I do want to bring it up because I think it's significant for a number of reasons, and it really ties into our securities initiative. The reason that the Patron Purge is really substantial for the IT team, especially part of securities, is because it keeps our data clean. You figure if we have a database that is running, 15, 20 years, we have patron records that have accumulated for that long. And so we're collecting address information, email addresses, phone numbers, and it's stuff for patrons that may not have even been a part of the library for the last 15 years. So why retain that data? Why put that patron data at greater risk? Because you have to remember, the more data that we collect, the more of an impact if there were potentially a breach, or for that matter, if there was just mishandling of data. If there's maybe someone that exports data from Blue Cloud Analytics and doesn't handle it properly, and it's kind of out there in an Excel file or something like that. that poses a risk. So the patron record purge is really important for that, for those elements, and so that's why we're going to turn this into a monthly process, and that's actually starting next month. Is we'll have an automation that's going to be purging patron records that are over 10 years of inactivity. And so, this is kind of the thing that we've been talking about in every one of the firesides. We've been giving updates on this. And so where we're at right now is we're going to actually have the first automation that's going to be happening in October for the patron record purge. And Dave Payson has actually been creating the scripted automation for that. So we've been pretty excited to get that in place. And all of your libraries should have dossiers in Blue Cloud Analytics that you can reference right now if you want to look over the patrons that are being purged that are over 10 years inactive. There are all sorts of there's documentation for how you can follow up with those patrons and ensure that their last activity data is updated and that their records are updated if you want to avoid having them purged. But again, remember, these are patrons that are over 10 years inactive with our libraries, and so their information is potentially no longer valid, or for that matter, it's data that continues to pool up in our system that really doesn't have a lot of value at certain points. So that's really the push for the patron record purge. The next thing I want to talk about is a few other notable projects we have on deck. So we keep talking about directory services. We haven't had a chance to really dive into this just yet. Certainly the Securities Initiative has taken our priority right now, which I'll go into a little bit more in just a moment. But directory services ultimately is, we're planning on having an integrated authentication database that'll handle Blue Cloud workflows integration in the future. We're still kind of teasing apart what that means exactly. So we hope to have more information on that in upcoming SWAN technology updates. We're going to be expanding the Blue Cloud pilot, and that's going to be coordinated through the Circ Advisory and UX team. So just basically getting more feedback on the product and getting that over to Cersei Dynix development team so they can continue to improve on it. We're also looking potentially at an upgrade to Web Services 6.2.1. And so this is something that we've been looking at for a few months now. We're a couple versions of Web Services behind. And as you may recall, earlier I mentioned Web Services is that middleman between the ILS server and our, a lot of services, in fact, but primarily our OPAC services, so Enterprise and Aspen. But it also talks to a lot of your third-party vendors. So if you have like Communico or I'm trying to think of a few, I think Evance might be one of them. Patron Point also interacts through web services. This is kind of the future of how we want to do interactions with the Symphony server. So we don't want to use unsecured SIP2 anymore. Web services is the ideal way of going about it because it's secured, it's a modern, robust system. So this is what we use for those. So we're a couple versions behind, and that's not too significant. It's mostly just bug fixes that we're looking for and a few feature advancements. But we're looking right now for a major bug fix, and we haven't been able to get it working yet, and we don't think it comes with this version. So we're testing it on our test server. If it turns out that this new version does resolve those problems, does resolve that bug, then we're going to move forward in the next week or two to get web services upgraded. These web services upgrades happen overnight. They are in the very early morning hours, and they usually take less than an hour, maybe even in some cases less than 20 minutes. So it's really minimal disruption. It's more the cleanup afterwards that sometimes we have issues with, whether there are web services licenses that don't transfer over properly, or maybe a command or something that doesn't work properly. So that's really what we're looking into and trying to avoid. So if that is coming up, we will make the announcement, but there's not going to be a significant impact to the library. It's mostly just going to be some tweaking that we'll have to do on the back end to make sure that it works and talks properly with everything. So that's really a few of the projects that we have on deck. And again, watch for that Web Services 6.2.1 announcement if we do decide to move forward. If we don't, then it's probably going to be delayed for potentially several months, because we want to make sure that the Aspen migration is reliable and we don't run into any issues talking back to the ILS with the Aspen server. So we've weighed that risk into the future of that project as well. So the next project that I want to talk about is kind of a recap of some of the information that we went over in the quarterly, and that is the SWAN Information Security Risk Assessment. And this ties into the SWAN Securities Initiative. And so basically, I want to recap some of this stuff because I think it's really important for IT folks and really any library staff to know this. So if you miss the quarterly, then we'll have a chance to catch up. And if there were questions that you wanted to ask at the quarterly, but you have a chance, you're welcome to shout them out here. But the information security risk assessment is basically we've been approved to move forward on a project from the September 2nd quarterly meeting to work with Sikich, a third-party contracted company, to do a risk assessment of SWAN library services. They're going to be looking at our network, at our server configurations, at how we handle passwords and kind of the general knowledge of our staff. And they're going to look at the different risks that are impacting us and how those are and how do we mitigate those risks and how do we move forward. Anyone that's worked with our libraries for a while knows that security is inherent in all of SWAN services. And whether you've noticed it or not, SWAN is quietly and sometimes not so quietly ensured that security is a consideration in every project and system that we use. And that's from our VPN connections that we use for every one of our libraries to connect into the ILS, to using TLS encrypted websites and granular permissions on all of our systems as well. We really have a strong security-minded focus in everything that we do, and so this is going to be kind of coming to the surface, and we're going to have someone evaluate and tell us how we're doing. And this kind of ties into some statistics that we've been seeing lately. The biggest being ransomware. And I mentioned the quarterly. I think it's interesting looking back. So I've been in IT for I think almost 18 years now. And looking back when I started IT, just doing kind of basic desktop support and things like that, ransomware was just kind of barely this thing, barely a blip on the radar. Like it was mostly just, I remember just having to clean up a lot of laptops with malware and viruses and things like that. And that was never terribly difficult. But ransomware was just this thing where like every so often you get someone that was just completely locked out, all their files were locked down, things like that. And it's just exploded exponentially over all those years that I've been in IT, and even over the last several years. So as you can see from the numbers here, ransomware attacks really are on the increase. And it's no longer limited to just malware. These attacks really are more sophisticated, and it boils down to exploitable vulnerabilities, whether that's an unpatched system, a weak password, even an over-trusting staff person. So we need to look at all these things and weigh the risk against how those are all being managed. The graph here illustrates nearly 80 million documented ransomware attempts in June 2021 alone. That's immense. And this all comes from a SonicWall cyber threat report. They release these every few months. So this was the mid-year 2021 report. I have a link to that source in the PowerPoint presentation if you'd like to check it out. There's a lot of great information in there, a lot of statistics about how this is kind of affecting everyone. But I think one of the big things that I want to tie this into is that it's not just big businesses being affected anymore. It's also it's government entities, it's libraries, it's schools. We are potentially becoming targets now. So looking a little bit deeper into this is more ransomware by the numbers. So this is the ransomware attempts per customer in 2021, and you could see the dark blue, the one that's kind of skyrocketing here. That's actually government. And SWAN is kind of somewhere between government and education for the most part, but that's still kind of that ties to us. So really, I wanted to mention here that managed service providers, healthcare, education, government entities are becoming common targets. And why is that? It's because we hold valuable, personally identifiable information, We might not have things like credit card numbers or social security numbers, but we have address information, email addresses, phone numbers, stuff that potentially you could go and you're just a little bit of data away from, creating a credit card or taking out a loan in someone's name or things like that. So it's stuff that puts us at risk. And a really notable cyber attack recently, if any of you've heard, Boston Public Library was actually hit by a ransomware attack on the last week of August, and they were down for an entire week. Their ILS was down, and so it was a huge ransomware attack, and they had to find a way to mitigate it and get all their systems back up and running. And we've heard this from our libraries as well. So it's stuff that's hitting home. It's stuff that we need to figure out, and we need to figure out how to move forward on it. Now, tying hand in hand with kind of ransomware and security is also patron privacy. And so I want to give a better idea of the challenges that we face relating to patron privacy. This is just kind of a bubble sort of ideas that I wanted to display here. These are the different things, these are the different challenges that we face every day when it comes to patron data. The biggest one that I wanted to put really prominently in the middle is third-party vendor authentication. It's every couple days we get a new request for a third-party vendor authentication for libraries, and that's perfectly fine. There are a lot of vendors out there that offer really amazing services to our libraries, whether that's Overdrive or any number of databases and electronic resources and things like that. They're all really great, and they all do a lot of good things for us. But you have to remember that every time that a new one of those subscriptions is signed up, we have to go in and we need to find a way to get them connected to our ILS so they can perform authentication. Over the years, we have found ways to limit the data that they can access, whether that's we use more granular permissions, or we've leveraged a lot through Open Athens, which has been a fantastic partner. And Open Athens basically gives third-party vendors almost no information. It just says, yeah, that's a valid patron. They're not blocked. They're good to go. And it just sends like a status of yes, you can authenticate them. That's kind of ideal in a lot of these cases. Is the patron data doesn't need to come along with the authentication. The third-party vendor doesn't necessarily need to know the patron's birth date or the last thing they checked out, things like that. So we try to consolidate what data is going out to these third-party vendors, and we always ask those questions when we set up these new integrations. So that's really one of the biggest things that concerns us. But there's also other stuff out there. There's third-party marketing tools, and there's data collection analytics services that a lot of our libraries are starting to use to see, what are patrons checking out, or what are the demographics? What are the demographics that I'm not serving? This is all really interesting information, and it's interesting data for our libraries to capture. But at the same time, you have to consider patron privacy. How is that affecting the privacy of anyone that is a patron for any of the SWAN libraries? Because remember that just one library can access patron data from any one of the 100. So that's really significant. And then we also have, on the other side, we have more globally accessible ILS tools. Blue Cloud, for instance, is cloud-based, so it's not going through our VPN. It is secured using SSL encryption and the standard protocols and a login password. But you have to keep in mind that's globally accessible, so we need to make sure that the person that's accessing it is the actual person that needs to be accessing it. It's not someone that's somehow managed to get some compromised credentials or something like that. So this is all really significant to us, and this is stuff that will tie into our security risk assessment. So let's talk about the third-party vendor that we've selected. So we actually went with Sickich, and Sickich, I think that's been a common name in a lot of our libraries. There are a lot of libraries that actually contract for IT services through Sickich. They're actually worldwide. They have 15,000 clients, and of course you can read all this right from the slide. But mostly what it boils down to is they understood our service model. They understood how SWAN interacts with our libraries. They understood some of the inherent risks without us going too deeply into it. Now, we did look at some other services that also can do the same thing. Another problem that you might consider is that we are not a huge corporate conglomerate that has millions of dollars to throw around at these kinds of things. So it makes it less likely for third-party contracted services to get back to us. Again, SICKIT works with our libraries. They recognized our need and they wanted to work with us. And we valued what they understood about us. They had a good team. Mostly they have a wealth of certified IT experts that will be a part of our team for the security risk assessment. And they hit all the important notes that we need to make this successful. And so this has been approved. We approved that. We had it approved in the quarterly. And so the point that we're at right now is we're actually just waiting to have our kickoff call, which will be the first week of October, and we'll be moving on from there. So exactly what are we doing with SICKIT? So what does this all entail? First of all, the goals for this security assessment. Number one is determine the applicable security risks and their potential impact to SWAN. We need to weigh those risks and create some kind of mitigation plan. We need to translate how that ties into our disaster recovery plan that we've been working on for years and kind of trying to touch that up. Determine vulnerability gaps in our system configuration, whether that's bad passwords or things like that, and create a process for repeating the cycle moving forward. We also want to adopt industry recognized frameworks when going through security configuration policy. So what SICKIT has proposed is NIST 800-171. Now, I don't know a whole lot about that just yet. We're going to be going into a lot more of that with SICKIT and ensuring that's the right one for us. But what it boils down to is basically we're looking at a worldwide understood standard when it comes to security. And that way we can go to a third-party vendor and say, hey, we are NIST 800-171. You can look that up pretty easily online and see what that entails. And understand that we can't give you the universal access that you're looking for because that would violate our framework. So it's kind of giving teeth to some of the policies that we've been trying to enact over the years, the vendor access policy and things like that. This will finally be a policy that is globally accepted, that everyone is trying to follow, that allows us to negotiate with those vendors to get them to observe security at the same level that we are. Now, another thing is that we want to ensure compliance in everything that we're doing with any applicable legal frameworks, such as COPPA we've been talking about over the years, or SOPA. And these are guiding how we collect like minor information or student information, how we're collecting it and distributing it and destroying it as we need to. So we want to make sure that we're compliant with all those laws as well. And then the last thing is, and a big part of it, we want to pass this knowledge on to our library. So we want to go back to all of you in these SWAN technology updates and in quarterly meetings and say, this is what we learned. And this is what you can learn from it. And this is how you can better secure your library. And if you want to work with SICKIT the same way as we did, you can, and they'll work with you to get pricing and things like that. But in the meantime, this is what we learned, and here's how you can combat that. I want to make it very clear that this project is exclusive to SWAN policies, systems, and networks. It's possible that library staff may be consulted, but the assessment and the mitigation of these issues doesn't necessarily involve your local networks or your systems. It stops at your firewall. If we're managing your firewall, then that'll be tied into it too. But your local networks, your local workstations, that's not a part of this. This is primarily SWAN headquarters and how we are managing these risks. Looking at SICKIT has broken this into 4 phases that I'll just go through really quickly. Phase 1 will be identifying risks to the organization and the controls for measuring those risks. So that's that NIST 800-171 that I was mentioning. And this is just kind of a breakdown of some of these risks that we've identified just through some brainstorming. There are the global threats, of course, that's ransomware, the costs of ransomware, everything that's out there and potentially impacting us. And then there's the internal threats too. So things like our libraries have acknowledged ransomware attacks, or the fact that we have over 1 million email addresses in our database that are susceptible or desirable for potential breaches. We integrate with over 80 third-party vendors. It's really, that number continues to grow. And then we have external analytics systems that are harvesting our data as well. So like Blue Cloud Analytics. So it's a trusted server, but the data is still going to another place. So we need to make sure that that data is destroyed or handled securely and processed in ways that are acceptable. The second phase is analyzing and weighing the impact of those risks. So that's specifically looking at that NIST 800-171 and weighing the impact of those various risks. And that drives how we plan for the future. How do we mitigate those risks? How do we process this? What's the highest priority? So to give you an example, if we determine that a server is using a password of password, that's going to be a massive risk. That could be potentially severe because it's maybe a major server. It's an imminent impact that someone could get access to that server right away. This is just an example, but that's the kind of thing that we'll weigh very highly in our risk assessment. So the next thing would be forming a treatment plan, a plan of action. So after we know what those risks are and we've weighed them, then we talk about the recommendation from SICH. Okay, so we're using a password of password. What do we do? You have to use stronger password requirements and in fact even change the server configuration so that you are forcing those password requirements. So that's something we could potentially do. That's something that we'll implement immediately. We'll determine how that will impact our services, and we'll plan a start date and a completion date for that kind of thing. Same thing with using multi-factor authentication across our staff workstations, and we're already doing a lot of that. But that's to ensure that this is across all of our services and across all of our servers and networks and things like that. And the last one is ongoing risk management. So this is moving forward, identifying new risks as they come up and processing them in the same way. This will involve continued consultation with SICH, continued advancement of our risk register, and then also sharing those recommendations with our libraries and continuing to keep you informed. So this isn't just a one and done thing. We actually have the timeline here. So we're looking at a pretty compressed timeline to get the first 4 phases done, but that 4th phase really is moving forward, and it's going to be kind of a cyclical process. And another part of that is also our standards development. So this is creating policies, whether that's taking a look at CERC policies or password policies and things like that. That will also tie into this whole process, but that'll be something that we'll be working on in the future. So that's kind of where we're at with the security assessment. I'm really looking forward to it, which may surprise a lot of people. Most folks think that an audit sounds terrible, but this is something that I've wanted to do with SWAN for a long time, and it sounds like a lot of the folks in the membership really want this as well. And so we're excited to do it. We're excited to get kicked off, and that's going to be starting next week. So that is the security risk assessment. Any questions or any comments, concerns about that at all? Okay. So the next thing is we're going to move to a presentation from Rudy Host. He's going to talk about one of our new favorite features. How do we do that? And he's going to talk about some of our open source projects and how you can manage an open source project and give back to the library development community. So Rudy, I'll let you take it from there.
Thanks, Stephen. As Steven said, I'm Rudy Host. I'm SWAN's systems engineer, and also I'm highly involved in SWAN's open source initiatives. So I wanted to share a little bit about what, how do you open source a project, and why would you even want to? So first off, you just kind of need to discuss what open source is. So open source, traditionally, when you think about it, when people talk about it, they're referring to software, but that is not quite the limit to the scope of what open source encompasses. You can have software projects, almost anything else that you can think of, whether it be something like sewing patterns, or if you're creating an electronics project, you can open source your PCB design. Um, it really just can encompass anything. I've even seen that there's open source soft drinks where a community came together, developed something, and worked together to make a product that anybody can utilize. Um, it's generally no cost. You can utilize it, make any sort of changes. Almost always, you can redistribute it as you see fit. Um, there is a caveat, though. You can get a lot of things on the internet for free, but that does not make them open source. Really, the ability to make changes to it and see how the inner workings are, and um, that essentially encompasses what open source is. And here at libraries, we've been used to sharing information since essentially libraries were a thing. That's kind of our um, core ideal, is the sharing of information. So we feel that the open source is kind of a no-brainer for the library world. Some specific examples of open source: uh, Mozilla Firefox. It's a web browser that just about everybody on Earth has used at one point or another. You can look to see how that works. You can make changes, you can recompile it, you can fork the code. Forking is when you make a copy of it that is different than the original, so that way you can maintain your own set of changes. Um, Aspen Discovery, which Stephen had talked about, that's an open source project that we've partnered with Bywater Solutions. They're the organization that does the majority of the development for it. Um, that being an open source project has made it very easy for SWAN to kind of hit the ground running with it. When we started talking with them, it didn't really support Symfony, and now it does fairly well. OCLC Holdings Manager, that's an open source project that SWAN created from scratch with collaboration from other LSAPs in the state of Illinois, just because we have had a goal in we had a common goal in mind, so we worked together and created the project for now not just Illinois libraries, but all libraries that use OCLC and WorldCat. So, next slide, please, Stephen. So the big question is, why even bother with open source? What's in it for you? So a lot of times what you can get from open source, you can form a community. You can create a user base that hopefully also is motivated to make improvements to whatever it is you're working on, whatever your project is. Again, whether that's software or something else. You can pool your resources. Resources could be money if you are funding a developer for it. If you don't have that resource in house, it could be development. As I mentioned with um, Aspen being open source, primarily the development of that is done by Bywater Solutions, uh, but they do accept um, they do accept code and a lot of recommendations from all of their clients and users. And in fact, SWAN has contributed code back to Aspen, uh, things that we saw that it needed and we felt other people would need as well. Quick patch, they merged it in, and now everybody's running the same code that we contributed. Also, like distribute the workloads. Some people are very good at one skill, while other people are good at other skills. Um, you can work on the things you're really good at, and other people can work on the things that you're not so great at, and everybody benefits from it. Um, Sometimes, though, there's not going to necessarily be a community that's formed around things that you're working on. Sometimes you just want to give something that you've worked on for yourself out to the world just because you think that they would benefit from it, and you're not even expecting them to contribute to it. Um, I think that everybody here has at one point come across a problem, typed it into Google, and found that somebody else had that same problem, and they shared their solution, and um, you were able to take what they wrote in a blog or create a YouTube video about and fix a problem that you were having. That's kind of just the giving back portion of it. Um, like I said, you're not always going to get somebody else to contribute back to what you've created, but just the satisfaction of going out and helping somebody else so they don't have to recreate the same work is a good consideration of why you might want to open source something. Next slide, please. Okay. Seems like I'm not getting updates. So let me see if I can figure that out real quick.
We're on the how to open source your work, right, Rudy?
Yeah, we should be, but my screen hasn't updated. Let me just pull it up locally.
In the chat.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Good.
It updated now finally. Okay. So comes up, how do you actually open source your work? For software, like I said, traditionally open source has referred to software. There's a lot of different sites, websites that you can use. GitHub is a very popular one. That's what we at SWAN use for our software. You can also store things that aren't specifically software. Like I mentioned before, you can have an open source electronics project, and those sort of resources can be added to GitHub or GitLab or SourceForge. GitLab also has a local hosting option if that's something you're interested in. Um, Ultimately, you just have to figure out a platform that works for you, works for your, uh, goes along with your ideals, and you create your project, write a little bit of documentation on it so other people can get started with it. Um, so, also in libraries, um, one thing that might be potentially good to open source are your programs, the programs that you run. If it's a craft or just something informational, you can share all that, you can open source that, you can make it so other people can build off your work. Um, and there's sites that have things that are really good at um, hosting specific types of things. Like Thingiverse is really great for 3D models, for like 3D printing that you might use at maker spaces that some of your libraries have. Free Sewing has a lot of resources for sewing patterns. Um, Tribe of Noise is one that I found. You can open source your music if you're creating something like that. Um, and depending on how you license all of your designs, um, there's even ways to get paid for some of the things that you open source. Some licenses allow you to make it freely available for non-commercial uses as long as you attribute the original author. But also under that same license, you can sell it commercially. So making something for free for people who don't necessarily have the budget to pay for something can lead to maybe future sales with things um, from big corporations that also want to use your things. So that's another potential draw for why you might want to open source something. Next slide. So there are some very important considerations if you're open sourcing something. You need to be very careful that you're removing any sort of credentials, um, things like usernames and passwords. If you have API keys to access a service that's tied specifically to you, uh, client IDs for those APIs. Even the Wi-Fi networks could give away your location. There's databases online where if you know the name of a network, you can sometimes figure out exactly where it is. Um, for your libraries, that might not be necessarily the end of the world because you're generally going to be publishing uh, as your library. It's pretty easy, and you want people to know where your library is at. But if you happen to be doing any sort of testing, especially now with the way that work is distributed with the pandemic, you might accidentally give away the location of your home, which you don't want that to be public knowledge in most cases. Um, and then one of the most important things when you are open sourcing a project is to properly license what you're doing. Um, the problem with an unlicensed project that you find online is, say it's somebody open sourced their software, didn't add a license to it. You come across it. Legally, you don't know if you can reuse that code for anything. Um, there's a lot of things that if they intended it to be used one way and you use it a different way, it could open you up to legal trouble. So The recommendation from most open source enthusiasts and professionals is if it doesn't have a license, don't touch it. Don't even read it because you might be influenced by it. Um, and that could put you in legal trouble at some point. So anything that you are taking your time and effort to make available to somebody, um, just go ahead and add a license to it. Next slide, please.
Should be seeing that resources page, I think, Rudy.
Yep. So specifically on that topic, for choosing a license, there's a great site. It's choosealicense.com. It will kind of step you through. It distills the legalese that is fairly common in software and other types of licensing down into just what the core ideals of it are. Lets you know, are you going to allow commercial use for it? Do you have to publish all of your changes? Or is it just something you want anybody to be able to use for anything, that sort of thing? There's also a couple of guides. The opensource.com resource has a um, really good write-up of what open source is and what that means. And for anybody who has never contributed open source before, the opensource.guide has a really great guide of how you can get involved. And um, you don't have to be a programmer. You don't have to even be technically minded to be able to contribute to a lot of these projects. Documentation is one thing that a lot of projects lack in. So if it's something that you use, something that you have figured out how it operates, um, just going in, spending an hour writing a guide for how you use a specific function of it can be really useful for that project moving forward. I believe that's all that I had. So are there any questions? Any comments?
Thanks, Rudy. That was excellent.
Thanks.
I think that, as Rudy said, open source has been a big part of the library community forever, and there are a lot of systems that we use and a lot of services that we offer that are open source. And certainly Aspen or a lot of the developments that Rudy has worked on, those are excellent examples of giving back to the community. And again, there might not be folks that contribute back or make edits to the code or anything like that, but that's fine because someone else out there can go and use that. We're not making money off of it, so there's really not a reason to squirrel it away. You might as well share it with the community. So we do enjoy doing that. It's a big part of the model that we use at SWAN for all our development. Thanks again, Rudy. So just a few more things I want to cover quickly. First of all is ProPay credit card swipes. A lot of you have these in your libraries already, but I kind of wanted to give an update and say, for those of you that have been holding out for the EMV, the chip and pin readers, I think we're at a point now where I would recommend that you just buy the credit card swipe. Now that I've said that, of course, we'll hear tomorrow that ProPay has the chip and pin EMV reader. But to give you a little context, we've been waiting for those chip and pin readers since 2016. We've been pushing Cersei Dynix and we've been pushing ProPay themselves. And by the way, Cersei Dynix has their building right next to ProPay, so we joke all the time that some product manager from Cersei Dynix should just go knock on their door because they're next door. But ProPay has kind of moved on to a lot of other things. They do a lot more development for things like the kind of the scanners where you could just kind of hold your phone next to it. And kind of more things like that. So they moved on from chip and pin and really developing that technology. And I think at this point, the compatible technology that works with workflows, if you want something that's fully integrated like that, it's going to have to be the ProPay MagTech, the credit card swipe reader. So if you've been holding out, I would recommend just go ahead and purchase them for your libraries. Effective the 1st of October, the price has gone up. They're $85 now. And that we just charge back what we get from ProPay. So ProPay is charging us $85 per swipe now. We're going to have a new batch of swipes coming in October. So we're actually a little low on inventory right now. But if you're interested, go ahead and submit a request. We have that on the support site, and they'll send a ticket to us and let us know, and we'll coordinate a time with you so we can drop off those swipes. And then getting them set up is super easy. They're plug and play. You literally just plug them into the USB, and then you tell workflows that it's there, and then you can start using those payment policies that are already set up for your library. So I just want to let everyone know, if you've been holding out for the EMV, the chip and pin, I would say just go ahead and buy the card swipes. If at some point ProPay does release the chip and pin readers, you will have to upgrade all of the card swipes to the chip and pin readers, and that's basically a liability issue. If you're still running the old credit card swipes, then you could be liable if those swipes were tied to some kind of a patron that their data was breached or something like that. So you do have to run the chip and pin if that's available. Fortunately, it's not available to you right now, so just I would say go ahead and run the credit card swipes. Also, just as a reminder, you don't have to be PCI compliant. All the PCI compliance is taken care of by Cersei Dynix and by ProPay. So really, it's pretty straightforward to get these plugged in and working if you need them at your libraries. The last thing that we have is open forum discussion. So this is something that we typically do at SWAN Tech. I basically open up the floor. If anyone wants to bring up any projects that you're working on and discuss it with other attendees here, or ask for our insights on anything, you are welcome to do so. Feel free to shout out or post something in the chat if you'd like to. All right. Well, I don't see anything in the chat, and you're welcome to unmute if you'd like to and shout out anything. Okay. Julia had a great question here. Does your library filter internet access? Do you use your firewall or a third-party software to filter? That's a great question. So I'll mention the sonic walls that are in a lot of our libraries do have a utility that you can purchase that'll do filtered web access. But I know a lot of our libraries have other ways that they've been going about that, whether that's using an internal proxy server or some other configuration. Anyone want to chime in on that? Aaron's using the Sonic Walls content filter as a part of the comprehensive gateway security suite. So yeah, that's that additional service that you can purchase with the Sonic Wall, and that's pretty reliable. A lot of folks do tend to use that, and that's happening all at the firewall level. The filtering, and so that makes it easier, so you don't have to set up a proxy server or set up something on individual workstations. It just happens right at the firewall level, right when traffic is coming into the network. Thanks, Aaron. Zachary Warren mentions that they are using NetNanny in youth services. Okay, yeah. So I think we've heard NetNanny before. Michael asks how much. I can't say offhand how much it costs for the content filter. You'd probably want to check with if you have a software partner, whoever you get your like your Microsoft licensing through. You can check with them to see how much the Sonic Wall content filter is. NetNanny, I believe, is also a licensed service that you'd have to pay a little extra to get.
For the Sonic Wall service, there's a lot of factors that go into cost. Depends on the model of Sonic Wall that you have. Depends on how many endpoints you're planning on protecting. So there's not a great way to give you a cost estimate without talking to one of your suppliers.
Thanks, Rudy. Okay. Good discussion. The next thing I want to mention is if you, actually, Julia has a question. Has anyone used a paid version of KnowBe4 or another phishing awareness training? So this is a really interesting question because as a part of the security risk assessment that SWAN is running, we are looking to get one of these services. We actually just had a call with KnowBe4, I think last week, and we've also been looking at Iron Scales, which was recommended by one of our libraries. And both of them offer good products. KnowBe4 is more of a learning platform, whereas Iron Scales actually has some integration. It can integrate with your O365 and look for different phishing emails and spam and things like that. So it's kind of, you know, a phishing and spam filter on top of what you have existing. So we haven't really come to any conclusion on either yet. We're still evaluating our options, but those are just a couple to mention, to look into KnowBe4 and Iron Scales. We're also looking at, there are actually a lot of built-in utilities if you have a high-level Microsoft O365 license. So SWAN has an A5 license that gives us access to kind of, we bought the battleship. We have, you know, our phone service goes through O365, our mailboxes, all of that stuff. And so we actually have some built-in phishing awareness training and also more advanced threat protection that comes along with that. So we're evaluating that as well. But that's a fantastic question, Julia. That's actually something that we'll probably bring up in a later SWAN update. Just we'll give our breakdown of what we found from all those services. And Matthew mentions that he's worked with KnowBe4 and they've at a previous job. And actually, I know a lot of folks in the IT industry that have also sworn by KnowBe4. So it's very well known. It's a pretty popular one at this point. Michael Richardson also mentions that Cisco has an open DNS for filtering. I think for like web filtering. So that's one way to do it as well. But yeah, so kind of the three that we're looking at are KnowBe4, Iron Scales, and then the built-in O365 functions that come with the E5, A5 licensing. That's something to look into as well.
Stephen, this is Matthew Hennessy.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Stephen?
I can hear you,
man. And Julia, what I would recommend, because I used KnowBe4 at my previous job, like I said, and it is a suite, as Stephen and you probably know, Julia. Negotiate your pricing because they're very aggressive. They will, if you go that route, because it is a suite, and they include dark web scanning. So you get a report it's an executive summary report of emails that they've found on the dark web from your organization. So that's very helpful. And setting up and configuring your phishing, where you do the phishing simulation to your staff is very, very easy and very easy to manage. It's easy to upload a batch of your email users into it, and it's got a very intuitive user interface for you. I can't speak to the other product that Stephen mentioned because I have no experience with it, but here at the library, I've been here 4 years, and our managed services provider is a Kaseya. We get Kaseya through them. Okay, I don't manage it, but Kaseya recently purchased a couple of companies, and they do that now. They have a dark web scanner, and they use something called ID Agent, which is very similar to KnowBe4. And they will do phishing campaigns on our behalf. So that's very, very, very helpful to be able to do that, because you see who in your library are the biggest people susceptible to clickbait, and then you can do remedial training through them, and it's pretty cool, because KnowBe4, when I did it, it was not embarrassing. You know, the rest of your organization does not know, but if I, for instance, am susceptible and I click on a link, it immediately notifies me, but in a very forceful but polite way, and I have to do a remedial training of that. And the training, and they also do things like PCI training through KnowBe4. So I was very happy. Plus, I know Rudy could probably speak to this. The reason I chose KnowBe4 when I was at my position in the previous company was because their association with Kevin Mitnick. Kevin Mitnick was at one point the most wanted hacker in the United States. He is now their hacking security agent. So he went from a black hat to a white hat, and the training material that he put together and that has evolved is very, very good. And I think Rudy can speak to that. He's not the only person, but he's very well thought of in this regard. He's much like if you ever saw Catch Me If You Can with Tom Hanks and Leo DiCaprio. That's how Frank Abagnale evolved. He went from trying to, con people to instituting the policies, and banks still use the stuff he put together. So yes, and Aaron Sievers, I just saw. Yeah, I went and I got Ghost in the Wires, and I recommend that book. We're all in libraries. You can check it out. I actually bought it because I wasn't working at a library before then. So anyway, I'm just going to shut up, but I just want to say that I don't think you can go wrong with KnowBe4. Stephen can probably add more light to that other product that they're evaluating, because Stephen and his staff are very good at evaluating multiple products. And I did too at the previous company, but I chose KnowBe4 because KnowBe4 was very highly rated, and they were very good, and I don't think you can go wrong.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, to reiterate, KnowBe4 is highly rated, and they continue to be one of the top in the industry. But also, as Matthew said, they are very aggressive with licensing, and they tend to be on the higher side for pricing. So I would certainly say do your homework, get a few quotes, and look at a few different services. Again, I don't know what direction that we're going to be going in. We only just recently found out that we have a lot of these functions in our O365 licensing. So that's actually looking really promising. So we should be able to do a lot of the same functions as KnowBe4 in terms of staff training. I don't know if it has as robust of videos and like quizzes and things like that KnowBe4 or Iron Scales offers. But yeah, this is something that certainly I'll try and incorporate this into future SWAN technology updates, and then we can also bring this into the forums, which is actually my next slide here. Certainly the best way to continue our discussion here is to contribute to the SWAN community forums. We have a whole forum dedicated to technology. Some questions we don't always have answers to, or library staff might not always have answers to, but it's always good to pose it out there. And we have hundreds of members now all throughout our our library community that can answer those questions there. So I just wanted to give a shameless plug to our community forums. Be sure that you have a login. Make sure you use that to continue the discussion that we've had here. And just looking back at the chat a little bit, Aaron Sievers mentioned that he's actually using a DNS filter for web filtering. 1.1.1.1 family is he's using that, which is useful for kid-friendly hotspots. That's offered by Cloudflare, so that's great. Michael Richardson also mentioned that they're using Sophos for web processing phishing emails and watching for spam like that. And I think everything else was answered here. And I think that pretty much is everything that I wanted to go over. And so the upcoming meetings, we have a fireside, which obviously everyone's invited to, that is coming up next Tuesday. Actually, that's really coming up quickly. So we have the SWAN Fireside Chat, our next RFID users group for anyone that is an RFID library or interested in RFID. That is coming up October 28th. And then our next SWAN Technology Update, we do those every 6 months, so that'll be March next year, which we don't have a link for that yet, but we'll get that posted as soon as we populate all those links.
Oh, I wanted to mention one other thing, Stephen, because I happened to be on a cybersecurity webinar yesterday, and they mentioned a free, because I know Rudy and I concur, open source is awesome. There's a free tool. Anybody can, in your favorite browser, you can search for Virus Total. And what this allows you to do is you can, for free, you can enter, say you get a suspicious email or your malware system flags something as suspicious. You want to know whether it's true or a false positive. In most cases, it's true, but you can go to virustotal.com and you can enter a URL. They even have the ability where, for free, you can forward the email to scan@virustotal.com, and you'll get a response, and it tells you, because their heuristics, they check it against a myriad of different sources, and they'll come back and tell you whether it's highly malicious or whether it's clean. So I thought that was awesome, excuse me, because I had never heard of that until yesterday, and that's a valuable resource, and I know Stephen, you and your staff could probably utilize it.
Yeah, that's terrific. You said that was virustotal.com?
Yeah, and you can just, if you want, just in Firefox or Chrome, just do a search for Virus Total.
Okay.
And it'll be a top hit or top of the list, and go in there, and it's super simple. You know, like I said, you can type in a URL. You can, rather than upload a file, because, you know, if you get a suspicious attachment, the last thing you want to do is download it, right? So you can forward the email, like I said, to scan@virustotal.com. You'll have to put in some information for yourself so they know where to send the results back to, but it'll also check any attachments.
Good to know. All right. Thanks, Matthew.
Very welcome.
So those are our upcoming meetings, and if you have any questions or follow-up, certainly you know where to reach us, and that's everything that we've got. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. If you want to stick around, I'll be answering any questions afterwards. But thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.